Why the sea? What did Roger think? And why no criticism? And what do these three questions tell us about Rachel Carson's legacy? And I'm going to slow it down a bit this time. Why the sea? Rachel Carson had a difficult childhood, a solitary and often painful childhood. Her only close relationship is with her mother, who in the early 1900s, when Carson was born, was a disciple of the nature study movement. And as a child, Carson finds in the wilds of nature much beauty and wonder, and also great solace, a refuge, especially from the very painful and frequent twists of fate in her family. And this will continue into what will in many ways become a painful adulthood, marked by a degree of social isolation and frequent crises in her career, and especially at home, and will lead above all to Carson's great love of the sea. And to Carson, the ocean becomes the part of the natural world where she finds the most solace, that is least human, that's outside human control and governed instead by timeless, eternal rhythms, and that's so vast that humans can't possibly change it. And when she writes Silent Spring, her only political book, and the only one that's not about the sea, she does it in real part out of concern for people and other living things and the ecosystems they share. But her real fundamental motive is that after World War II, with the 1-2 punch of 1, the bomb and nuclear fallout, and 2, the dangerous spread of toxic pesticides, she concludes that in fact no part of nature is outside our control or the power of humans to alter or degrade or outright destroy it. And she in fact mostly writes Silent Spring out of the depths of heartbreaking disappointment and real anger that even her beloved sea is not inviolable. Carson writes her first book, Under the Sea Wind, said to be her favorite, entirely from the point of view of the sea and its creatures with no human presence. In her second book, The Sea Around Us, and the one that made her famous, a few scientists and explorers appear briefly, and she includes a few pages on oil exploration. And according to historian Gary Kroll, she did write a full chapter on using the sea, the ocean in a hungry world, which addressed the debate at the time on any intensive harvest of plankton and fish as a major food source. She decides to cut it. Her last sea book, too, Edge of the Sea, is all natural history. As she starts to write Silent Spring, she runs through a couple of other working titles, which include The Control of Nature and Man Against the Earth. Why the sea? Where does that question lead? Rachel Carson is one of the great American apostles for the vision of nature as the real and timeless world outside the troubled human world. The book's legacy, I think, is mixed. It's double. Much of what Silent Spring led to is acutely invaluable. It awakened public awareness about real and frightening environmental dangers, and it led to groundbreaking and foundational institutional structures to grapple with these dangers. Why Carson writes Silent Spring, though? Well, Carson generally helps cement this problematic vision of nature at the very core of modern environmentalism, and that, I think, is a more troubling part of her legacy. What did Roger think? Roger Christie, the famous boy in the book, The Sense of Wonder, isn't an easy guy to find or to find out about as an adult, which is itself interesting. He's not thanked in the biographies. The bios do say that after Carson dies, her editor, Paul Brooks, not her family, takes him in, but Roger doesn't appear in the acknowledgments for the biography that Brooks writes, or in the index, and barely in the book. Reading the bios, you sort of begin to wonder, where's Roger? Is he alive? Is he, like, in prison? Or worse than that, does he maybe work for DuPont or something? He's not highly Googleable, but you can get a few hits. In 1980, he accepts, so remember, he's like in his 30s at this point, he accepts the Presidential Medal of Freedom on Carson's behalf. But where does he live? What does he do? In 1993, he's one of the interviews in the PBS American Experience documentary, but not one of the main ones. He says, "I never forgot that I had another mother who was a real mother, but you know, Rachel was my mother too." He clearly did love Carson and admired her. He says also, "She would find something interesting and call me over. She was a great one for getting down and hearing under the rocks." Nice, but not, "Hey, we got under the rocks together," or "Wow, those outings were amazing." And what does he do? If he were a biologist or a scientist or conservationist of any sort, they'd say, wouldn't they? And I tried to find a pic of him. I actually tried to pull it off the documentary, but you cannot find a pic of this guy that you can actually copy. It's actually looks very exceptionally normally baby boomerish, actually. Finally, in 2007, the centennial of Carson's birth, his local newspaper does a feature on him. He lives in Harvard, Massachusetts. He's married and has 2 sons. He's a recording engineer. The Washington Post interviews him in an article about a rescreening which he'll attend of the 1963 CBS special. He says, "She would lie for hours on a blanket in the woods and see what would come and go. Some of the outings," he says, "were a little too boring for me." Yes. Finally, read between the lines. Roger must have had such a painful childhood. He lost 2 mothers by the age of 12. He was, according to Carson's chief biographer, Linda Lear, a somewhat difficult and undisciplined child. One wisp of critique I find in this literature is that Carson, while she loved Roger and devoted a great deal of time to him, might not have been the most skilled indoor parent. Carson was close to her mother, but I can just infer from the silence in the biographies, though I don't know for sure, not close to her father or to her much older sister and brother. Her father didn't seem to be around a lot. As adults, her siblings both left bad marriages. She had to drop out of grad school at Johns Hopkins to help support her family, and when her father died shortly after, she became the main breadwinner for her mother, as well as for her sister and 2 nieces who had moved in with them. Her sister died soon after that, leaving her and her mother with Carson's 2 young nieces to raise, and her adult brother was, by all accounts, a piece of work. One of her nieces dies, which leaves her with Roger. All these constant crises prevent her from pursuing a PhD, and then hinder first her progress in a career in science, and then time and again from focusing on her writing career, which she loves. Throughout, she takes refuge in the natural world. I wonder, though, if nature accomplished the same things for Roger. Surely some, but maybe not as much. What did Roger think? Where might that question lead? In the modern era, the wild places and things in nature can hold great beauties and wonders, and also be ugly and tedious. And Carson was a supremely eloquent voice for that. These places and things hold ecological truths that, Carson conveyed passionately, we need to understand to inhabit the ecosystems we do inhabit. They can also offer real refuge and solace from the pace and demands and social complexities of modern life, including anxieties about modern life itself, but not for everyone, and not necessarily for other societies or in other eras. Carson is one of our great apostles for the oh-so-problematic idea of nature as a timeless refuge from the relativism and vicissitudes of the human world. And again, she helped cement this idea so far almost undislodgably at the very core and center of modern environmentalism. But this idea of nature is timeless, and one of the reasons why it's oh so problematic is disguises that it in fact has a history. It has served both general social needs throughout American history and specific social needs for every generation, and I think fulfilled very specific and very personal needs for Rachel Carson. Why no criticism? Since the publication of Silent Spring, the specific circumstances of her personal and professional life as a woman have stirred up a kind of perfect storm of the intertwined meanings of women, nature, virtue, authenticity, and history, in which Rachel Carson is the perfect apostle for the idea of nature as authentic and timeless, an idea that has so often rendered the idea itself outside of history and also resistant to critique, and that, in turn, can render its perfect apostle resistant to historicization and immune to criticism. Here's the thing. We know that being a woman opens Carson and Silent Spring to attack, but it also deeply informs the defense. Carson is single. She never marries. Her closest relationship is with her mother. Her other major close relationship as an adult, apparently non-sexual, is with a woman, her friend Dorothy Freeman. And yet she still raises children, lovingly. She sacrifices dearly to do so. She dies of breast cancer. She's the paragon of a virtuous woman, through no intent or fault of her own. That women are the caretakers of a society's virtue and morals might be one of the few ideas historically that can rival in power and persistence the idea of nature is the authentic source of virtue. It's as if Rachel Carson stands between the meanings of women and the meanings of nature, and both radiate virtue towards and around her in a closed system. Again, through no choice of her own. I'd actually love to hear what she'd have to say about her sainthood. I expect it to be quite funny. She's actually really tough. She also successfully pursues a career in a male-dominated profession against all odds, and she out-argues the men, which resonates in the feminist era, And in this post-feminist era, she does all that and raises 3 children. Why no criticism? Rachel Carson's life and vision personify ideas about both nature and women that radiate timeless virtue and authenticity. And this biography, along with Carson's exceptional ability and passion, helps make this self-reinforcing idea of nature, for which she's such a great apostle, and which she helps cement firmly at the core of environmentalism, exceptionally hard to dislodge and to critique. When I Googled up a 2009 CBS special on the legacy of Silent Spring and clicked to play the video, here's the ad that popped up. What a great job BP has done to clean up the 127 millions of oil they spilled in the Gulf. The environmental movement clearly still has a lot of work to do, and Carson's crusade against omnipresent and poisonous toxics is hardly finished. And this vision of nature as the central environmentalist trope, as what we talk about when we talk about environmentalism, has gotten us far. But it is long past time to move it away, to dislodge it from the center of environmentalism. We owe so much to Rachel Carson, but I don't think her vision of nature can ultimately sustain a culture of environmentalism that will effectively arm us to create the clean, healthy world full of healthy wild things and places, as well as healthy people that she wanted to create for Roger. When Rick Santorum When Rick Santorum, in one of his famous recent pronouncements, the ones that would be startling if they weren't so frequent, when he questioned President Obama's Christian values, it was actually when Santorum was talking about Obama's energy policy. And later on Face the Nation, when Bob Schieffer asked him to elaborate, he explained, I was talking about the radical environmentalists, of which apparently Obama is one, right, who all believe that man is less important than the earth. And Santorum might be an extremist, the sweater vest version of Glenn Beck, the polite Rush Limbaugh. But the Republicans are exploiting this class divide, which has long plagued environmentalism fiercely. More than any cultural, social, or economic issue, environmentalism is the #1 right-wing bogeyman. It's the code word for they don't care about you. They, environmentalists, who want people to be able to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And we make it so easy for people like Santorum every time we say we're trying to save the planet. I do know that environmentalism is changing, that a new and more inclusive culture of environmentalism is happening and which breaks down the class divide in lots of places. I see it in projects in Los Angeles, for example, in not a few newfangled cross-class coalitions to preserve park space, to clean up the air, to revitalize and reimagine and intensively remanage the phenomenally messed up watershed that LA inhabits. And I'm sure you see it too in the places where you live. Yet the established 20th century rhetorics can seem ineradicably powerful and so persistently counterproductive. And shouldn't we fight fiercely to change them with all the skill, passion, and fierce integrity that Rachel Carson brought to the cause? Here's my dad. These are his grandchildren. They are very much, in all the best ways, their grandfather's grandchildren. My father loved history. He believed in its power, so I have to think that he would agree that the most powerful thing historians can do with their heroes is to make them stranger, and then make that strangeness familiar. Why did their ideas make sense to them? And how do these ideas make sense and not make sense for us now, so that we can achieve the perspective that we need to move into the future? Thanks.